Maybe I'm just projecting someone else's experience as my own memory, but I think one of the fondest video game experiences I had growing up was in Mario Kart 64. Being able to drive around Peach's castle freely on Royal Raceway despite it being off the beaten path was so awesome to me way back when. Besides some missing details, it's a near perfect replica of how it appeared in Mario 64, just that now it's a small portion of a much larger locale, one that's a polar opposite to the original serene context. Genuinely, I have no clue why they decided to open this part of the course for exploration. Maybe for some technical thing like the same map also being used for the award ceremony, or something else entirely. Either way, it's a great little touch to what is such a stylistic racetrack in a game already packed with such immense energy at every turn. The comic book-esque visual effects, the jazz fusion influence permeating the soundtrack, the strangely beautiful CG designs for the cast, and of course, the enigmatic music note. Sonic. I forgot he was here too. So, Mario and Sonic. Not to be mistaken with the whole Olympic Games thing, which I'm pretty sure only exists to make this video's title more confusing, but the respective franchises they represent. An iconic rivalry that defined the 90s gaming landscape, pervasive as much as it was fleeting once Sega exited the console market, barely a decade after Sonic 1 released. Which, of course, led to both series going down two very different paths as a result. Mario would soon wash away what little troubles the games had in the transition to 3D. Sonic, on the other hand, experimented with all sorts of things to varying effectiveness, ultimately resulting in a legacy tarnished by one key factor: criticism. Or something like that. You know the drill. Transition to 3D, jank and bugs, sluggish gameplay styles, story tone and voice acting, aggregate scores, the year 2006, sometimes 2014, and other assorted things. Regardless of what you think of the post-Genesis Sonic games, it's clear as day they're much more contentious than their 2D platforming counterparts. Hell, even the 2D handheld games fared better with critics at the time than their large-scale home console counterparts. And to this day, these games have continued to be contentious among both fans and critics alike for those very reasons, even with years and years of iteration besides a few notable exceptions. Which makes the comparison with Mario even more stark. Nintendo vs. Sega may be a thing of the past, but being one of the few series in the platformer space nowadays makes it hard for folks to not scrutinize its shortcomings, on top of the aforementioned Olympic game collaborations. A game like Sonic Forces can't exactly hold up against Mario Odyssey from the week prior, or even with Sonic 06 vs. Mario Galaxy if you want to go for some low-hanging fruit. The Big Red's rarely ever faltered in any genre it's tackled, continuing to innovate its gameplay and visual presentation with incredible execution that sometimes even forms subgenres in their own right. But once again, at the same time as the first fully original Mario Kart in 11 years, taking the leap into an open world as the biggest entry yet, a Sonic game of a similar type has come careening onto the scene. How could a more traditional kart racer like Sonic Racing Cross Worlds ever have the impact of Mario Kart World, let alone in practice? Just a reminder, the former is merely one of many examples of that Nintendo sensibility in action. And I don't know, I'm curious about those differences in both series. Maybe I can't answer why that is, but I'd like to delve into that nevertheless. For about as long as the Jumpman himself has existed, Nintendo has always been ahead of the curve when it comes to their game design. Sure, they may not be the first to make a side-scrolling platformer or implement a camera lock-on feature, but time and time again, they've set the standard for the gaming industry at large. And with it, a whole host of other games trying to get a piece of that delectable Nintendo pie. Which brings us to Sonic the Hedgehog, who, at his very conceit, is sort of a trend chaser. He was created for an internal character design contest to directly compete with Nintendo, his archenemy being a large man dressed in red with a prominent mustache. And that's not even getting into the slew of other media Sonic has taken more than a little inspiration from over the years. So it's not surprising the series would eventually breach into the kart racer. I'm not going to go in depth with Sonic's entire history with racing games, but I'd like to highlight a few important things regarding that. For one, there's not really any one series of Sonic racers you can point to, unlike Mario Kart. It's a bunch of disconnected sub-series with few mechanics shared between them. Only more recently has Sega leaned in on one specific vision for these racers, with the All-Star games and their successors. Even then, that constant experimentation with the format led to such interesting and downright compelling gameplay styles in their own right. Sonic Riders might have a steep learning curve, but once you get into the groove of performing all kinds of tricks without needing to stop for air, it feels genuinely magical. Sonic R might be a bit less successful in its on-foot ventures, but I can't help but love the weird shortcuts and collectibles scattered about its 5 wacky courses. And the music's great too, in case that needed further affirming. Honestly, some of them are less kart racers specifically and more racer racers, just with a colorful mascot skin. The typical Mario Kart item system tends to be secondary to effectively utilizing intrinsic skill-based elements like your movement abilities. Still very arcadey though. And that might be a big part of why Sonic's racing outings don't typically fare great among critics. Besides what I've already established relating to jank and stuff. At a core level, it's a lot harder to get a friend to come over and play some Sonic Riders with the friction of understanding its complex mechanics, especially without clear explanation from the game itself. And I don't think it's a coincidence that review scores immediately went up once they pivoted to a more conventional racer format in the 2010s. I don't say that to take away from what those games managed to do, but it's merely one example of the delicate balance that needs to be maintained for broad appeal to actually make back a profit. Though, I can't say I'm surprised a format that started with something called Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing could have different game design priorities. Looking at other kid-friendly gaming mascots, they fared much, much worse. No, not critically, but commercially, in an existential sense. In the wake of the first Sonic game, mascot platformers were everywhere, even receiving spin-offs of their own in the same vein as Mario and Sonic. But by the end of the 2000s, that sector had largely dissipated as a result of mid-scale development studios' troubles adapting to the HD generation, either pivoting to lower power handheld and mobile markets, or outright shuttering. What separates Sonic from its imitating peers is its continued existence and presence. A game like Sonic 06 may have been devastating for most other series, but it was just another Sonic release that broke around 1 million in sales. And the series marched onward into the 2010s with a yearly release cadence, only broken by development times increasing across the industry as a whole. Might not be a AAA series, but it certainly has the persistence of one. All of this to say, the Sonic franchise is kind of just built different. Whether you want to attribute that to its transmedia output, or just sheer cultural dominance carrying over from the 90s, this series has never really had a dormant period at any point, besides arguably the Saturn era. It's had that chance to constantly iterate and experiment with various different ideas and gameplay concepts that Mario has rarely, if ever, delved into in any capacity. Mario might not start shooting hookers, but you can't rule out Sonic doing the same. But despite Nintendo's tendency to play it safe with Mario, sometimes actively to the game's detriment, they still have a much better critical track record than most of their followers, the Blue Blur included. There's some outliers like Mario Tennis Ultra Smash and Mario Party Advance, but you'll rarely ever see a Mario game that is wholeheartedly hated. Even the notably stagnant New Super Mario Bros. Series has a reception on par with and outright exceeding the peak of Sonic's output, helpfully quantified by these weird numbers that keep sliding on screen for some reason. Is there something more to how Nintendo always puts out such resonant games beyond the legacy of their main franchises for older generations? What makes Mario so different from Sonic, and by extension, everyone else? What do you call something that's beyond fairy tale, fantastical but comforting, eccentric yet enrapturing, something particular you can't easily put into words? Those might not be emotions you feel towards it, but for so many out there, Disney magic is real. And it's easy to poke fun at the kind of person who's devoted to their filmography, has all sorts of merch of their child and adulthood favorites, even moved to tears after their parks reopened post-shuttering during the pandemic. A Disney adult, if you will. As weird and ridiculous as that all seems, well, it's impossible to be totally certain, but you're likely no different towards your favorite media properties. Shit, you may not be all that into the transmedia output of the Walt Disney Corporation trademark, but you've probably seen at least a couple YouTube documentaries about the insane projects at their theme parks. It's not just me, right? Even through the thick veil of what is pretty much just a long-winded advertisement for new Mario Kart, buy now, the sheer passion present in the Ask the Developer article is crystal clear, going as far as to hold off the game for their next system so they wouldn't have to compromise on any aspect. Even if shifting World into a Switch 2 launch title was probably more so because of the last entry's absurd sales figures. I've always digged just how fleshed out the world building in these games can be, especially with 8 leaning more into the sports angle with all the fictional brands and sponsors present throughout the tracks. Spaces that lend themselves well to some boundary break type free cam probing. And what better way to expand upon that sense of place by literally letting you explore said place in an interconnected manner. And I feel like the concept art present here illustrates just how insanely intricate Mario Kart World's world is, especially in execution. And it's hard to understate the childlike whimsy that brings to this game. The countless alternate outfits make these updated character models look even more appealing, like the delightfully American cowboy Mario, Peach's fervent summer kimono, food service Yoshi, Lakitu's highly attractive fisherman attire, the Game & Wario callback with Pirate Wario, and that's barely even scratching the surface when it comes to that single mechanic. There's also the wall running, the rail grinding, pilotable trucks and UFOs, the day and night cycle, the F-Zero 99 like knockout tour, over 200 goddamn music remixes for free roam, the missions in said free roam, and the fact that they pulled all this off in one big map at a similar, if not higher fidelity compared to 8 is fucking nuts. Bonkers, might I add. This game is so jam-packed. It couldn't be less surprising that it took nearly 8 years to make, spanning an entire console generation in the process. And sure, while the concept of an open-world racer is far from groundbreaking, it's that Mario style and theming, and the mechanics that come with it which make it stick out among the crowd. As someone who has yet to actually get my hands on a Switch 2, I am incredibly envious. All this developmental context in mind, though, it genuinely comes off like a Breath of the Wild 2. Only this time, they didn't call it Tears of the Kingdom. And just like that game, the shift into an open world format alongside other traditions being broken became pretty controversial. Though, in Mario's case, that may be an extension of the whole discourse surrounding Switch 2. Rising game prices are more likely symptomatic of extenuating economic circumstances than big corpos randomly deciding they want more of your money at a similar time. At the end of the day, it's a piece of corporate art made at the forefront to generate profits for said corporation and its shareholders. It's far from the tangible creative soul of an indie project, but I think the energy and precise level of detail is distinct and valuable in its own right. Even if that doesn't always make up for shortcomings in other areas like gameplay and such. I have my proclivities, and let me tell you, Mario Wonder is not one of them. Simply put, Nintendo has an ethos like none other, and as much as that can suck ass for a multitude of reasons easily named, it's also what makes their games kick ass in a way that's tough to find anywhere else, especially in the modern day. They even have elaborate theme parks now. It's hard to imagine any other team, big or small, that could pull off a game of this caliber so effectively. And that's what makes Mario Kart World so sick to me. Which, obviously, means Mario's God's greatest gift to man, and Sonic is an irredeemable piece of shit franchise that's worth nobody's time. Why put up with agonizing jank with dated visuals when you can play games that are not only finished, but executed with such beauty that this dog-water parasitical series could only dream of? Because Sonic is pretty cool, more or less. And Jesus Christ, that hurt to write, even as hyperbole. But unfortunately, that isn't too far off from the discourse surrounding these gaming franchises as of late. So, here's why I think you should care, if you've forgotten or otherwise. If you're one of those online gamer freaks like myself, you might have seen an article floating around discussing a quote from Sega's Second Division, the current home of the Sonic Team label. The article in question christened, "Sega says it wants Sonic to surpass Mario." For sake of transparency, this is an excerpt from a much more extensive interview published on Sega's Japanese website, going over current and future goals for the Sonic series, and generally just trying to get people to want to work at the company. General Manager Osamu Ohashi states their intention of surpassing the dominance of the Mario IP. Though, keep in mind, this is going through machine translation, so it's possible it's not entirely accurate to the original text. Nevertheless, it's what this article ran with. An article from an outlet called Nintendo Everything, mind you. It's a bit of an evergreen sentiment, which is probably why it tends to crop up in discourse nearly 2 years after its original publication. But mainly this part, unintentional fan art usage included. And I don't say this to figuratively shove the series deeper into its allegorical locker than it metaphorically already is. But on the games front, I don't think it's probable for Sonic to exceed Mario, or to match Nintendo's output to begin with. But here's the thing though, I kinda doubt anyone else can. Now, I think it's time I introduce the secret number 3 mascot platformer, a series that has not only found immense critical success, but as well as sales figures beating Nintendo's top plumber boy himself in some instances, with a comparable level of polish and care to boot. And it's none other than Crash Bandicoot. The reason it's a secret is because Crash Bandicoot doesn't exist. Not even tens of millions of sales could save Crash's modern resurgence from plummeting back into borderline non-existence. Crash 4's 400,000 sold in the first few weeks, compared to Insane Trilogy's 500,000 on launch day, ended the immediate prospect of a follow-up right then and there. This is just an unfortunate reality for many modern games out there, both emerging and legacy IP alike. And for the games that try to be like Nintendo's nowadays, there's almost always a major setback, like a lack of meaningful content, or a monetization method that makes you wanna kiss yourself goodnight, or something along those lines. It's hard to compete with a company that can push back a nearly finished game an entire year for extra refinement, like with Tears of the Kingdom. That simply isn't a viable business move under most circumstances, which puts Sega and, more importantly, Sonic in a really interesting position. Not that it's exempt from any of those things, far from it, but I think in recent years, it's almost been a sorta light in the dark for non-indie releases of its ilk. I don't say this as some sort of weird, moralizing call to action, but hey, you should check out Sonic Racing Cross Worlds when it comes out. Because from what I've played of the closed beta from February, this is shaping up to be one of the most exciting racing games this year. And from the trailers I've seen, it's also looking to be an exciting racer in general. Yeah, the footage you're seeing kinda looks like a janky GameCube game with HD graphics, but despite how busted it might look, I can personally assure you its chaotic, arcadey sensibilities are exactly what make it so enjoyable in the first place. And I imagine the worst of Crossworlds' chaos will probably have been addressed by the time this video is out, if Sega doing pre-release feedback surveys is anything to go by. Gadget System, my beloved, I miss you and your ridiculously fun augmentations to the racing controls every day. I would be a Fast Tricks guy for life, but the one that lets you snake drift Mario Kart DS style resonates with me on a spiritual level. I don't doubt whatever's next in store for these Sonic racers will take some inspiration from Mario Kart World's format, likely ending up weaker in some areas as a result, with the precedent of the past 30-odd years. But even as much of a copycat this franchise can be at times, it rarely falters in maintaining some sort of unique drawl. Shadow 5's hybrid platforming gunplay, Mania's independent heart, Force's low-key killer character creator, Frontiers' literal form of fast travel, and soon Crossworld's... whatever the fuck it's got going on. Do you see all this shit? One of those things might not be like the other, but to me, I like them all the same. Kinda, somewhat. Sonic is a franchise defined by change as much as it's defined by its history. Just by comparing where it started to where the series is now, it's clear these games maintained little of the specific mechanics that once felt fundamental to their being. As just one example, Mario's ability to jump on enemies and bounce off them has become so ingrained in the series' character, even Mario Kart adopted a mechanic in the same vein as it. But conversely, Sonic almost entirely dropped the Mario-esque bouncing in favor of single-button action commands as your primary engagement against foes, save for when the classic gameplay is deliberately being revisited. You could say the series simply lost its way for the past 2.5 decades, and maybe there's some truth to that, but still, the thrill of the speed was maintained, the spectacle of the set pieces, the balance of the momentum, most of which readapted into a different context. The Sonic series is a feeling. It's not something you can easily describe in detail, and what that feeling is could vary drastically depending on who you ask. But there's two words that can get the idea across fairly well. It's cool. Comically abstract observation aside, even with Sonic's radical mechanical metamorphosis over the years, it has still continued to have some of the most distinct gameplay I've seen in a platformer. As troubled and played out as it might be, it's hard to find something like the boost gameplay anywhere else, besides other speedy platformers and racing games that aren't super comparable. The fact there are Sonic games in the first place to be criticized, and to be discussed in any light, is nothing short of a miracle. It's weird to think about, but that's where we're at, especially within the past several years. I feel the only thing worse than a bad game is to not exist at all. Even if Sonic might stand to take a few notes from Nintendo's games, I still feel that with just the right approach and some fine-tuning, we could see a game that may not match Mario, but rather become something else entirely. What we associate as jank or generally inherently flawed design could lead to something genuinely fresh and wonderful, possibly even beyond what the series has already done in the past. I'm not saying Sonic's gonna be the next Dark Souls or anything, but I think it's worth extending some amount of grace to those weird design decisions, despite how muddled it can feel. To exist is a part of this series' nature, but to legitimately thrive and continue to push itself forward on various fronts is something really special. In the past few years alone, we got a shakeup to the series' long-held level structure, a game that explores Shadow's past in a digestible and coherent package, and now a game that some are saying could stand toe-to-toe with Mario's latest karting excursion, or at least something with its own appeal. And it's not just crazy psychos like me saying that, it's real games media saying these things. Well, thegamer.com at least. Shoutouts, I guess? Despite some controversy regarding the game's pricing, it's honest to God shaping up to be a well-loved game. Maybe even popular with all the wild crossovers they're doing post-launch. I won't deny there's still some things that are legitimately rough around the edges. The presentation is a bit of a mixed bag with some wonky animations, and courses which can visually leave more to be desired, And additionally, I can't say I don't fear the online crossplay breaking because of the titular Crossing Worlds gimmick, given the sheer amount of platforms supported with wildly different capabilities. But now more than ever, it feels like the tides of the series as a whole are starting to shift. I can't tell you what form that'll take, but I have faith in this current transitional period for Sonic, that wherever the games go next, both mainline and spin-offs alike, they'll bring out new kinds of gameplay that are both fresh and inventive with established mechanics. Whether that leads to more enjoyable experiences without the typical rough patches is anyone's guess, really. You might not care, but I care. Too much. And you're subject to the consequences of that. Of course, for your own sake and just in general, you probably shouldn't extend too much grace to a corporation worth billions of dollars. There's more than enough reasons not to, assuming you can afford to make a decision in the first place. But I wouldn't be saying all this if I didn't see any merit in Crossworlds, or any other aforementioned Sonic things. And above most else, I value diverse ethos in this industry. It can be fun to think about how different development studios could handle other companies' IP, but ultimately, I'm more interested in letting whatever vision is already present shine, over tossing it all away because it didn't live up to the Mario standard. That's why I'm interested in both of these series' latest racing outings, not because they are equals, but because they approach the same genre in wildly different ways, with differing reasons to love each. And it feels good to say that for once. Or, another way to put it, these two things have merit, and I want to engage with them both. Two cakes. We will be playing Mario Kart World and Sonic Racing Crossworlds for $140 each, or however much new video games cost now. It's, probably already $1,000 by now, isn't it?